It's all about the money, boys!
I'm talking about this. I'm talking about this.
Revenues up is by having a winning team. The only way you can have a winning team is by the best players. The only way you can have the best players is by having the revenue. The only way you can have the revenue is by buying the best players.
It's all about the money, yeah? Right, because it's all about the money for you, right?
Money, money, money,
Money, money, money.
Money, money, money.
Money, money, money.
money, 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 money.
Follow the money, Mr. Paul.
I decided to follow the money.
Follow the money.
Follow the money. Just follow the money.
Take a look at these clubs. What do they have in common? They've all won the European Cup or Champions League and faded into obscurity. Probably wouldn't consider these teams as European contenders, but once upon a time they were. But it's not just the Champions League. All over football, the number of teams that can indeed compete for league titles and trophies has been rapidly dwindling in recent years. So that begs the question, what the hell happened? Why is there a widening gap between the have and the have-not, and how did this all begin? Well, that is the question we seek to answer in the first ever episode of Timeline. Let's get one thing straight. Football has never been equal. From the get-go, certain teams were always dominating, and this led to them amassing bigger fan bases, sponsorships, and investments. However, football at this time was still a game of development and less acquisition. You still had to have a good scouting network and academy if you wanted to win. This meant that despite the dominance from the old money clubs, the lesser clubs were still able to compete for silverware, so long as they scouted well and developed just as well. Here's another question. Who are the old money clubs? Well, let us consider this criteria. Teams that must have won at least 5 league titles from 1945 to 1995. You see why I chose this period later. Secondly, they should have won at least 1 European Cup title during that span as well. The final criteria is that their dominance must be spread out between multiple decades. So let's see who meets that criteria. 15 clubs in total are what I would label as old money clubs. And of those 15, only 8 have managed to stay relevant past 1995. So now here's the question we're looking to solve. What happened in 1995 and why have some teams gone into obscurity? Well, it all begins with one player and a court case. Jean-Marc Bosman was a Belgian footballer in the 90s who would go on to change the game forever. See, Bosman had joined Standard Liège in the early part of the decade. However, he found playing time hard to come by, and at the end of his contract, he decided to transfer to French club US Dunkirk. However, during this time, free agents couldn't just leave the club at the end of their contracts. The club they wanted to sign for still had to pay a fee to their previous club to acquire their talents. This was an issue for Bosman, as US Dunkirk couldn't afford Standard Liège's asking fee, and therefore Bosman couldn't join the club. Enraged at this, Bosman decided to take legal action against the Belgian FA and Standard Liège. In a lengthy 5-year court battle, Bosman would win a landmark case that would change football. The immediate consequence of Bosman's court victory was that free agents could now leave for free, but it would impact so much more. Firstly, this meant that power would go from the clubs to the players, meaning player movement would be at an all-time high. This would lead to an explosion in transfer fees over time. Due to increased player movement, UEFA had to scrap the 3+2 rule, which prevented clubs from naming 3 foreign players in European competition. But the biggest consequence, at least one related to this video, is that it created an arms race for talent. No more was it about developing talent. It was now about acquiring as much talent as possible. This, in short, explains what happened to these clubs. But let me explain further. Football is capitalistic in nature. However, guardrails were in place to ensure that a little bit of parity would always exist. However, once the Bosman law was passed, those guardrails were inevitably knocked down, and what ensued was a free-for-all. So the clubs with huge financial backings were able to build modern-day super teams like the Galacticos of Real Madrid. So some of the old money clubs couldn't spend enough to keep their position at the big boy table, and were not able to compete in Europe anymore, or were just relegated to domestic success at most. Before 1995, 19 different clubs had won Europe's top prize. Since then, only 3 clubs have joined that list. Look, money itself doesn't guarantee success. Just ask Tottenham, but not having it is a guarantee that you won't have much success to begin with. This happened gradually, but as with all capitalistic systems, over time, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. So this begs the question, if some of the old money fell off, who replaced them and how? Well, to answer that question, we have to move forward and talk about oil. Lots and lots of oil. The year is 2003 and Chelsea is drowning in debt. Ken Bates, the then owner of the club, is seeking to sell the club, but very few are willing to buy Chelsea simply because of the debt. However, there is one man with very deep pockets who is interested. Roman Abramovich is a Russian oligarch who made his fortune in oil, and he wanted in on owning a football club. So in a London hotel, he strikes up a deal with Bates worth £140 million, a big amount at the time. He would take Chelsea's mountain of debt, but more importantly to our story, he would change football forever through his insane investment. Roman Abramovich began spending money on his club at levels that football had never seen before. These investments would change Chelsea completely from an above-average team to one of the best clubs in the world. Chelsea didn't have much success before Abramovich, but after him, they would join football's elite. Abramovich found a glitch in the system, a broken patch if you will, and he spammed it all the way. The blueprint was created, throw a shit ton of money to acquire the best players and coaches in the world, and then win. It wouldn't take long before a few others would follow suit. Sheikh Mansour, a member of the UAE royal family, bought Manchester City in 2008 and followed the very same blueprint laid out by Abramovich and pushed the citizens from noisy neighbors to the best club in England. 2011, the Qatari royal family acquires PSG and follows the very same blueprint laid out before them to dominate French football. These three clubs are the oil clubs, the clubs that have joined the established elites of the sport in dominating football. Together they've changed the landscape of the sport for better and for worse. Firstly, the spending that these three clubs did prompted FIFA to create the financial fair play rule, which has been collectively ignored by all of them. Secondly, the increased spending has forced the old money clubs to catch up and spend big as well, which is what has supercharged transfer fees in recent years. This in turn has led to the gap between the frontrunners and the middle of the pack growing larger and larger. Just as in all capitalist systems, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. But just how poor have they become is the next question to answer. Branch Rickey is most famous for orchestrating Jackie Robinson's move to the Dodgers and subsequently breaking baseball's color barrier. However, before that, he created a system that would change baseball. In the 1920s, baseball had a problem. Major league teams had to bid against each other for minor league players with basically no regulations. To solve this, Branch Rickey decided that instead of bidding for minor league players with all the major league teams, he would simply buy up a couple of minor league teams, and any player who showed the capability to play in the big league would get called up from the minors. This trend quickly caught on, and before you knew it, multiple baseball teams had adopted this system. This would later on be known as the farm system and is still in operation today. But what does that all have to do with football, you ask? Well, modern day football somewhat works like the baseball farm system. The big clubs may not own those small clubs, but certainly small clubs serve as de facto academies for the elite. Any player dreams of playing for the big clubs in the world due to more money, more marketing opportunities, and a better chance at winning silverware. So if a small club develops a really good player, they have to cash him in early when he's at his peak value, or risk watching him leave for free at the end of his contract. This has led to big clubs using less and less of their academy, instead opting to sign players who have proven that they can play at the biggest level. This has only pushed the inequality further, as small clubs are ripped to shreds if they ever develop their team good enough to compete. Point in case, 2015-16 Leicester City's championship team lost two key players to England's Big Six immediately after winning the league title. 2017 Monaco had a promising squad that would win League One and make it to the Champions League semi-final. However, that team was dismantled by players leaving for bigger clubs. And let's not get started on Borussia Dortmund and the amount of top talent they've sold. All this has done is create wildly uncompetitive leagues where the champion can be predicted before the season with a 90% accuracy rate. This in football terms is what we know as a farmers league. The best example of a farmers league is the German Bundesliga, where Borussia Dortmund's lack of care for sustaining a championship team has led to Bayern Munich winning 11 straight league titles. It took a historic undefeated season by Bayer Leverkusen to stop this run. Needless to say, this type of dominance is bad for football, but it's not the Dortmunds of the world that suffer most from the inequality. It's the teams beneath them, and we must talk about them next. As a young fan in the early 2010s, I can vividly remember clubs like Portsmouth, Stoke City, Sunderland, Bolton Wanderers, Blackburn Rovers and others competing in the Premier League. These are proud clubs with rich histories, teams that have managed to win league titles in the past. And in recent years, these clubs have been nowhere to be found when it comes to Premier League football, and that's because these clubs have been priced out of the top flight. Just last season, all these promoted teams, Burnley, Sheffield United and Luton Town, were all relegated with an all-time low 66-point share between them. What it takes to compete in the Premier League and other top leagues is money. and lots of it, something that second division teams lack. These clubs are the true victims of a system that is increasingly choking the life out of the rest of the football pyramid. If you are promoted, you're lucky to survive one season, much less two. The second division and top flight almost seem like two different worlds now, and it's only fueled the inequality further. This has led to some clubs overspending just to compete. The aforementioned Portsmouth, for one, went bankrupt and into administration. Clubs are taking money from dodgy owners just to compete, and in some extreme situations, these owners have dragged these clubs into bankruptcy. Needless to say, this is extremely unhealthy for the sport, as a select few benefit from the system to the harm of the rest. Now, what can be done to repair the system? Well, perhaps the answer to a capitalist system is a socialist one that would spread the resources equally. A salary cap is often considered a solution to the issue, something similar to the NFL or NBA. A system that would favor development over acquisition, and one that would induce more parity. This would of course be hard to pull off, but it may be the only salvation from the current monopoly that is in place right now. There was something magical about that 2015-16 Leicester City team. At first, many of us just thought they were punching above their weight and they would eventually be knocked off. Then it never came. They just stayed there, and suddenly it felt like the whole world was rooting for them. This obscure team that some people couldn't pronounce correctly was now the darling of football fans worldwide. I think this happened because we knew we were all seeing something that we may never see again. It was romantic. It was my favorite Premier League memory ever, even more so than my own team winning the league. The point here is to say that teams should have the ability to feel that magic that permeated through Leicester City that year. That feeling should not be a once-in-a-generation thing. I think there are some incredible fan bases with rich histories and traditions that the world should know more about, but don't, because all the oxygen in the room is taken up by the bigger clubs. I mean, even looking at the so-called elite clubs I outlined earlier, it's evident that this list is in danger of dwindling further. For example, AC Milan hasn't won much in recent years and has been irrelevant in the Champions League. This monopoly is hurting everyone, even those that once benefited from it, which is why this list is only getting shorter until we have to tell our kids now how certain teams used to be good when we were younger. Football is a beautiful game, and more parity and competition will only make it more beautiful. So I feel it appropriate to take you back to a point in time when football was at its most beautiful, an afternoon in Leicester.